Hey guys, I am in a stairwell in Japan with my favorite kettlebell, and you are about to hear from Scott Harrison, Charity Water. You've got Colonel Nye covering for me while I'm climbing these friggin' stairs in Japan. Anyway, you're gonna love this. You're gonna learn how he took his entrepreneurial skills and he's doing something he absolutely loves. Purpose is awesome in life. Check this podcast out, you're gonna love it. Sorry, I'm out of breath. See ya.
So here we are back in Vermont, Spartan Up Podcast. Marianne's panning back, which is actually smart because she was almost impaled a moment ago without realizing it by Colonel Nye's microphone stand.
I like my weapons.
Colonel Nye, you do like your weapons. Thank goodness you're well trained in them.
And Scott Harrison likes
no
his
harm
water.
done.
Yeah, I don't know if our British doctor is as well trained in weapons, but she's certainly
Scalpels.
trained as a weapon of goodness out there saving lives on adventures. And speaking of weapons of goodness, we have Sephra here.
That's the
just
best
full
one
of
I've
sunshine and
gotten.
rainbows, and you're going to hear lots about that. So.
Thanks, Johnny. Right back at you.
You're very welcome.
Just a mirror of your energy.
And I'm Johnny. Joe calls me Dr. Johnny. Don't know why, but I'll take it. But what we're going to talk about right now is Scott Harrison, Charity Water. And here's a guy who has a real interesting story. He's very open about coming from a bit of a different background than he is now, a background of vice and I think he'd say selfishness. And he's found a way to transform it now where he is out there serving a need that he sees in the world and trying to make a difference.
You know, the rolling is always the hardest thing because it's hard to get started. So anyway, here we are with Scott Harrison of Charity Water in the heart of Tribeca in downtown New York City, just a few miles or blocks from the Freedom Tower. Yep. So as we came in, I couldn't help notice this is a very impressive site you have here, office you have here. But what grabs your attention quickest is kind of the pictures of the third world and the wells.
I'll start with the background because I'm, in so many ways, probably the most unlikely person you would ever interview that would be even associated with a charity. I grew up in a very conservative Christian home, born in Philadelphia, so I was an East Coast kid. And then when I was 4, we moved into a new house that had a carbon monoxide gas leak. And my mom almost died. She was fixing up the basement, breathing in these invisible fumes. And on New Year's Day, she walks across my parents' bedroom, collapses on the floor. And after a long series of tests, they find these massive amounts of carbon monoxide. So I actually got a little sick at the time. My dad got a little sick, but my mom, bore the brunt of this. So she didn't die, but she became an invalid, allergic to the world. Anything chemical made her sick. She was connected to oxygen. She was wearing charcoal masks. She lived in basically a containment room covered in aluminum foil. So it was bizarre stuff. Only child, caregiver role. My parents' faith kept them from suing the gas company. They didn't want to become bitter. And they raised me, in the church with great, great values. I completely rebelled and acted out, the most cliche prodigal son story at 18. I moved here to New York and said, look, now it's time for me. Now it's time not to play by the rules. And basically gave everybody the finger and decided to try to become the biggest nightclub promoter in New York. I wanted to be the king of New York nightlife. And I spent the next 10 years breaking every single rule that I'd grown up with. Throwing parties for celebrities, for models, for fashion companies, flying around the world to Fashion Week. And, maybe you know this scene. You've heard of, guys that are spending $500 on a bottle of champagne that costs $20.
No, I've heard of it. I don't know it. I've heard of it.
So that was my life for 10 years. And I didn't get to number 1, but I got to top 8.
Okay.
There were a bunch of us running it. And
It's a big city.
It's a big city, and my life at 28 years old looked like a guy that had smoked 2 packs of cigarettes for 10 years. The opposite of the fitness, right? Excessive drinking, gambling addiction, pornography problem, strip club problem, cocaine problem. So pretty much anything short of heroin, and I had been doing it. Now, my life looks awesome on the outside. So, I'm jumping to the backs of cars with girls that are on billboards and, Puffy's at table 1 and Jay-Z's at table 3 and all the girls are at table 2. And, so this looks like we're living the life. I realized what a scumbag I'd become on a beach in South America over a New Year's Eve vacation, really having reached a decade in the business. And
where was that in South America?
I was in Punta del Este, in Uruguay.
Okay.
Beach in Uruguay. And it was this opulent vacation. And I realized that I had become morally bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt, emotionally bankrupt, and that if I continued down this path of selfishness, the legacy I was leading was simply just to get people drunk. I mean, my tombstone might have read, here lies a guy that got a million people wasted.
Yeah.
So I began to rediscover a very lost faith, lost values, and being a radical guy, I moved back to New York City, and I sell all my possessions. I basically liquidate my life, selling my possessions, and I made this deal with God that I wanted to serve the poor for 1 year. I wanted to kind of almost tithe back one of the 10 years that I had just selfishly wasted. And having sold my possessions, I start to apply to the famous humanitarian organizations of the world, saying, hey, I'm ready to volunteer.
Yeah, choose me.
Yeah, I'm denied by every organization. No one will touch me because I'm a nightclub promoter. They don't even know how that would be useful.
Right.
So finally, and I had gotten a journalism degree at NYU kind of part-time, so I was a pretty good writer and a decent photographer. And finally, this one organization says if I was willing to pay them $500 a month, I could volunteer. And I had to go to post-war Liberia.
Yeah, that's
and live in a country.
Pay for the privilege of going to Liberia.
That's right.
Wow.
So I said, great, here's my credit card.
Yeah, not a lot of guys signing up for that.
So I signed up.
Wow.
And, in almost in a moment, went from throwing, fashion parties to living in a country with no electricity, no running water, no sewage, and no mail.
And what did you know about Liberia before you signed up? Did you...
People don't believe this, but I thought Africa...
What year was it? That was early 2000s?
This is exactly 11 years ago, 2004.
Okay, so the internet was around. Did you do some
Well, I
studies?
did then,
Okay,
but previously, I thought Africa was a country. I mean, I not made up of 47. I was as ignorant as anyone when it came to international development or the poor or anything. So I had to look up Liberia. I learned that it was founded in 1822, freed American slaves, and most importantly, had just come through a terrible 14-year civil war where kids had been given guns and told to kill each other and their families.
Brutal.
So Charles Taylor had just been thrown out. I go in with a humanitarian group of doctors to pick up the pieces, along with 14,000 UN peacekeeping troops, which was the largest force ever deployed in the world at that time. So I had never seen poverty before. There's no water in the country. There's no electricity. There's no sewage. There is no mail. And I remember my third day on the mission in West Africa, we turn up, and the government had given us a football stadium, a soccer stadium, to see sick people. And the doctors, I remember we had about 1,500 slots where we could bring patients on and help them. And there were over 5,000 people that turned up. I remember just weeping. Like, it hit me that, holy crap, we're going to send thousands of people home who have come with hope.
Right.
To give you just a comparison, in Liberia at that time, there was one doctor for every 50,000 people. And here we have a doctor, I think, for 180 of us.
And for me, I've done some traveling because I was in the military for some time. It's always the children are the hardest, right? You go into one of these areas, and regardless of what's going on politically in the background or the fighting or whatever, even let's talk about like Syria today, the children have nothing to do with that. So you see these homeless kids, you see these starved kids, you see, just abused, abandoned, whatever. And it really does affect you, right? I mean, it really pulls at you because you really, especially from what you're talking about, your Christian faith and values, that you want to reach out to them. And then sometimes you're overwhelmed because it's you and there's 5,000 of them or whatever.
That's true.
But for most of us, we are held back. And at least for in the military, as much as we do help, I can't go and start adopting children on every time I deployed, right? But you did step forward.
Yeah, we could.
So that's amazing.
And in, to bring it to water, so sickness everywhere, disease everywhere. And as I went into the rural areas, for the first time in my life, I saw kids drinking nasty water. Right. To see a kid drink from a swamp and throw up on themselves after drinking that water is one of the most visceral, revolting images. And I was selling $10 bottles of Pellegrino in clubs to people who didn't even drink it. So understanding that 53% of all the disease throughout Liberia, throughout the developing world, was caused by this one basic need not being met, I kind of jumped issue. So instead of wanting to bring more doctors, instead of wanting to bring more surgeons to the country, what if we could just make sure that everybody had water? That to me seemed like the question behind the question. And the cool thing was, I was really able to redeem the 10 years of decadent living because I brought all those people with me. So I rolled into Liberia with a 15,000 person strong mailing list of people that I'd been getting drunk. So they went from, getting an invitation to the Prada party to, here's a kid drinking dirty water. Will you help? Will you give him money? Let's drill a well. And, I joked that my list got a little smaller. Some people hit that unsubscribe fast and said, bro,
no longer friends.
No, thank you. But others really began to be moved with compassion and were generous. And some people even started volunteering on the mission.
So you started it. What did the beginning look like?
Yeah,
what's the first well or the first I mean, how did you have to talk to the county? I don't know what governments they have there. Probably didn't have. They have a failed government. So how did you get it moving?
Well, I should say before I got on the ship, I quit everything. So people were like, "Well, was you still doing drugs?" And no, I quit everything in one go. Never smoked again. Never touched coke again. Never gambled again. Never looked at porn again. I quit everything to try to, step into this new story. Really to basically end a decade of selfishness and try to step into a decade of service. So I wound up doing 2 years in West Africa on this mission. I came back. I knew that water was the thing. How could I live in a world where 1 billion people didn't have water? Their most basic need met. So at the time I was broke. I was living on a closet floor, not too far from here, of a buddy. I'd given all my money to this humanitarian organization and the people that I'd met along the way. And, nightclub promoters aren't great at saving. So, it wasn't a great time to start an organization, but I just believed that I had something to offer. And if I, kept showing up, if I kept advocating on behalf of the people that I'd seen, I could turn my past kind of decade into generous.
And how many,
generosity.
When we walked through here, there was a fair amount of, I don't know if they're employees, full-time parts, 78 employees.
We employ about 1,600. So it's worked. If you fast forward 10 years, Charity Water has raised over $200 million from 1 million generous people around the globe. We have 1,600 local staff in 15 countries that we currently employ. We have brought 6 million people clean water in 19,000 villages. So the org grew very, very quickly. It was literally doubling year over year. One of the key propositions when I started, I said, okay, this issue is simple, right? No one, regardless of their religion or their politics, and by the way, we're not a religious organization. I get to live out my faith through service, but it is, we have all types. And the mission of water, I thought everybody could agree on. Regardless of your politics, your geography, or your religion, nobody wants kids to drink dirty water. But when we set up the funding structure, I realized that people didn't trust charities. In fact, 46% of Americans do not trust charities. So from day one, we made this public promise to always use 100% of every donation to only fund the direct project costs. All overhead, all office costs, everything you see here would either be donated or would be covered by a very small group of 100 people. So that has been true in every instance. We even pay back credit card fees. So if someone gave $1,000 and American Express, took the 3% off the top, we actually raise that $30 and send all 1,000 to the field. So we have never broken that model. So people that didn't trust were able to know whether they gave $1 or $10 or $1,000, every single penny would go.
Yeah, and that's vitally important because as we've seen just recently in the news,
recently.
By the time this airs, it won't have been recent. But we've seen a major charity, a military charity, kind of have some issues. And it gets confusing in the number of charities and the overlap and where the money goes and the oversight. So
we don't want it to be confusing. 100% is clear.
Right. So I commend your efforts there. But I tell you what, we're going to take a break here. And when we come back, what we want to talk about is, so everything you've described, what I'm hearing is, in Spartan language, is you had an obstacle in front of you. You had a challenge in front of you. And you overcome, or you've overcame, or you're continuing to take on that challenge.
I hope you're not sitting still while you listen. If you are, you better get a burpee break in.
I am still in the stairwell while you take your little 30-second break. Let me tell you about this kettlebell. This thing changes your frame of reference. I am the most miserable guy alive right now, but as soon as I put it down, I'm happy as can be. I don't need all those things we all wish we had. I just want to put the kettlebell down. So, purposeful suffering, cold showers, carry a kettlebell, go running, do the hard things. Makes everything else fun.
Dan, I know you had a story you wanted to tell us, an example So why don't you...
Yeah, we were talking about kids, and just it's so hard for people here to imagine what it's like over there, right? Everybody has water coming out of taps. We flush the toilet. We take showers. One of the countries where we work in is Ethiopia. I've been there 27 times now since starting New York. And, not too long ago, I lived in this field. I heard this crazy story of a 13-year-old girl who had been walking 8 hours every day to get dirty water. And as the story went, as it was told to me, one day she comes back into her village and she's got this heavy clay pot that is strapped to her back. And right before she reaches her home, she slips and falls, and she breaks her pot.
Right.
And the story went that she hung herself. She didn't go back.
Desperation, humiliation.
So I wanted to know.
Yeah.
So I didn't know whether it was true. So I went and lived in that girl's village to retrace her steps. And it was really, in 10 years, the most powerful, visceral moment for me. And I retraced her footsteps. I met her friend that walked with her that day. I learned her name. Her name was Ledikiros Hailu. And I wanted to understand, what would drive a 13-year-old girl to that kind of despair? Why not go back? And what I learned was amazing. Her best friend said she would have taken her own life because of shame.
Right.
She broke the valuable clay pot. It cost a couple dollars. And because of her careless step,
Because she was for the family.
family would go that water. You got it. Yeah. And she didn't want to face her mother having let them down. And it would be better to take her own life than to say, hey, after the whole day, I didn't even bring you dirty water. And, just living there, off the grid, there's no cell coverage. There's no, I had to bring my own water in on a donkey and a camel.
Right. And Spartan's always talking frame of reference and changing your frame of reference. So when you're telling me she breaks the $2 clay pot, but it is the family treasure. Compare, contrast that, as we're talking about frame of reference, to the teenager who, gets the family car, dings it up, comes home, doesn't seem to care or understand what the importance of it is, and just, the things we take for granted, some children do, and just the level of responsibility.
Absolutely.
Responsibility there are different, and how much is placed upon some of these children in these third world nations who are, part of a family, who if they have lucky enough to have a job, take the money and give it to the parents, or they work, or they have enough children so that they can all survive collectively, kind of thing. It does make you sit back and examine our Western kind of lifestyle.
It really does. And the things we take for granted, we flush the toilet and it's all of the water that she'd walked for 8 hours. Right. And they would die to drink from the toilet. The toilet would be so much more clean than these swamps. So that's what we see out there. We're able to, transform these communities through clean water. The horrible irony is in so many of these communities, there's clean water underneath their feet, 300-400 feet.
They don't know how to get to it.
They don't have $1 million drilling rig. They don't have $10,000 to go and drill. So that's what we're able to do, and we've been able to do that 19,000 times.
So how many countries are you in?
24 countries.
Are they all in Africa?
No.
Are you in Asia now?
Central and South America, throughout Southeast Asia. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Cambodia, Nepal. Really spread across the globe.
So in all of those countries and all those environments, I assume then there are similar challenges, some particular and some kind of peculiar, right? So you face a myriad of challenges, whether it's tribal issues or whether it's government issues, whether it's just travel issues, so lessons learned from that to our viewers on how to overcome challenges. How do you keep the enthusiasm, the energy to keep going to when you face something new to say, well, I did this, but this is a little different, but I think I can continue to go. How do you rev yourself up to do that?
Gosh, challenges. There's so many. I mean, we had a rig run off the road the other day, and it was belly up for a month because our local partners were trying to reach this village where the situation was so extreme, and the villagers will often try to build these makeshift roads. It doesn't always work.
Right.
There are so many obstacles of procurement, of quality control, throughout the program side that we have to constantly overcome. I think one of the big challenges is just getting people to care. I would say that is the biggest challenge. I speak with a buddy at conferences sometimes, and he runs a big cancer charity. And he goes up on stage and says, how many people have had cancer? Yeah. And a bunch of hands go up. And he said, how many people have a family member?
Right, and then all the hands.
Or a friend, right? And I come out and say, how many people have had dirty water to drink? Yeah. maybe 2 or 3,
Right.
in the back from that have immigrated here. And so that's really a challenge. How do we keep people to care? And we've helped 6 million people. There are 660 million people without water. So we're at 1% of the problem. So just the fatigue that could set in. Right? Oh, well, I already gave to that organization, and I already did my piece. I mean, we need to keep showing up, keep telling the story in a new and engaging way, keep inviting people in and inspiring them to help.
Right. So for the audience and member who's facing their own challenge, so the idea there is just what? Just resiliency?
I think keep showing up. A lot of people say no. I mean, for every 10 people at the beginning that I was asking to help, 9 would say no.
Yeah, so don't accept it and just keep going.
9 would say no.
Okay.
Not for me. I'm doing another cause. What kind of credibility do you have?
Right.
And the one says yes, and then you go and you ask the next 10, and another one says yes, and then as you build it, 2 out of 10 say yes, and 3 out of 10 say yes, and 4 out of 10 say yes. But it's, I just remember at the beginning, it was just presentation after presentation after presentation, just telling the story, inviting people into it, and I think really importantly, not using shame or guilt. I think so many charities have peddled in the kids and flies, these kind of sad stories. Right. And we have really said, look, this is an amazing opportunity we have to impact the lives of people in a tangible, provable way by being generous, by giving our time, by giving our money. And we want to invite people into that. We look at it as a joy, as a hopeful opportunity, not, you have to do this. You should feel terrible about flushing that toilet, that long shower. So I think we've always tried to frame that in the positive over the last 10 years.
And the self-motivation then kicks in. So you're trying to get these people and you get them to realize what it is, and then they take on the challenge themselves.
Absolutely. And we've had many people do these events for us. They'll go run a race. They'll go skydive. They'll go climb a mountain. To raise funds. We've had someone, 3 failed attempts at Everest, but throughout that, she's raised $180,000 for the people of Nepal. So we see people say, I can bring my grit, my creativity. We have 6-year-old kids out there selling lemonade 12 weeks in a row, raising $5,000, just lemonade.
Right. Nice.
So that's really been our invitation to bring the best of themselves. Not everyone can write a big check, but everyone has a voice, and that we could be voices for the poor. That's our invitation to all. So
do you have an end state in mind?
Yeah, no one drinks dirty water.
Okay, no one drinks dirty water.
We're not doing this interview.
so
You're not here.
So how to listen? What you're doing is amazing, and I'm really, really appreciative of it. But how do you get there? I mean, you just said you're at 1%.
Yeah.
So you've got 99% to go, and you've got years and years of turmoil and drudgery in front of you to get there. So
you trying to depress me?
No, I'm saying so that is a massive wall in front of you, so to speak. So you just keep that enthusiasm that you can climb that obstacle. Is that the...
Well, I think it's not... there are people that we're going to be able to help directly by engaging everyday people. But I think there's also the awareness and the energy behind this issue. So globally, what happened over the last 10 years is the number went from 1 billion to 700 million, 660 million. So it's actually getting better. So we've got our piece of it, that's 6 million people. But we're calling governments to act. We're calling the big UN agencies to act. Some people might have heard of the Millennium Development Goals. Well, water has its own goal now for the next 15 years. And the United Nations and the world has said, we want to end water poverty. We don't think that we should be living in a world where kids are throwing up on their shirts because they had to drink from a river. So I think it's, we're going to make our direct contribution, but hopefully there's an even bigger echo chamber.
Big cultural shift, right?
When you get 1 million people out there that have given to Charity Water, that are ambassadors, if we can turn that into 5 million and 10 million, they have a much bigger impact just than that, those dollars that are given directly.
So in all your travels, in all your situations you've been in, have you ever kind of come up against something where you thought it was too much, too hard, too overpowering?
Yeah.
And then, what did you do?
So it was early on. It actually had to do with the business model. I mentioned that 100% thing, right? That sounds awesome, right? Everybody gets to give. Well, a year and a half in, we almost ran out of money. We had raised so much money for these water projects. The 100% was working. It was restoring people's faith in charity. But I was about to miss payroll and not be able to pay the 9 people working here. And, it was interesting. The advice I was getting at the time was go and borrow from the millions allocated for those water projects. You have to pay your people, write a little IOU. And I remember being so outraged by...
Slippery slope, though.
I was outraged. I was going to shut down the organization. I was going to send all that money, build as many water projects as possible, shut the org down and say, that didn't work. And at that moment, I was praying a lot, but I was praying with very little faith, if I'm honest. I thought the game was up, and a complete stranger walked into the office, took a meeting, and wrote $1 million check in the overhead account. And we went from a few weeks to over a year of funding. And he said, I love the integrity of this. I love what you're doing. You just need more time. And with that extra time, we found 100 more people like him who got excited about funding the overhead and never looked back from that moment. But it was really, there was that moral dilemma, right? You could have gone down the slippery slope and said, well, of course you have to pay your people. But we weren't going to touch a penny of the public's money. We were willing to die on that principle. And then a miracle happened.
For all those people out there who are trying to overcome a particular challenge that don't have a miracle, how do they do that? How do they overcome the challenge?
I think it's just tenacity. It's grit. I mean, this is something you guys talk about a lot. And I think staying true to your principles and the morals. That could have gone a different way, but we would have picked ourselves up and we would have tried to start Charity Water again with another business model. We wouldn't have given up the fight on the people that needed water, but we also weren't going to compromise our morality or our principles to do that. So I think it's tenacity, it's turning up, it's being willing to push through that no to people that say it can't be done. So many people have said that this couldn't be done or different aspects of it. And as we celebrate 10 years, there's 78 smart people here working every single day on behalf of those without water. There's 1 million people in the community, over $200 million raised. So a lot of them were, had we listened to them, there'd be no organization. There'd be no one with clean water.
I think what you guys are doing is amazing. I wish you all the luck. I hope that we have clean water all over this world. I hope that children globally get to drink good, clean water. And listen, I wish you a lot of luck.
Awesome.
All right,
Thanks
thank you
so
very
much
much.
for talking to me.
Here's a great tale. This guy's never traveled, never seen poverty really. And then, he sees poverty. He sees kids drinking dirty water and throwing up on themselves. And somewhere deeply ingrained in him, it just switches that light. And he says, he has to do something about it, and actually does. And clean water is a serious issue. And some of the things that really resonate with me, and hopefully the viewers can maybe understand it a little bit better, is that story of that girl that walks 8 hours to get that pot of dirty water and then breaks it and ends up committing suicide because of it. And he says, that's the amount of water that you go to the bathroom in and flush your toilet. And when people, maybe some more of your bohemian friends talk about composting toilets and human manure and black gold and things like that, there's a reason why we say you shouldn't be peeing into your clean water system. And it's a privilege that in America you don't often even acknowledge or face. But you travel a little bit out there, and it's something that a lot of people are dealing with. So here's a guy who's made a big difference, and he's positive at the end, saying the situation's getting better because of people like him and because of moringa seeds and other things like that. But I mean, I think he's a great guy, and what he's doing is very, very important.
It was a 180-degree turn in his life, really, wasn't it? When he's I think he's one of the most open in the sense that he's talked about all the vices he had right at the beginning when he was a club promoter in New York City. To see somebody come from what he described, the cocaine, pornography, everything he describes there, to what he's doing today.
Well, it's a life of vice, but it's really a life of selfishness, right?
Yeah.
And so he went from one extreme to the other. So now
selfishness to service.
Total
now, right, selfishness to now service, But he really is kind of, when we talk about Spartan and the Spartan course and going over the obstacles and all that, here is a guy whose life, is a journey, right? And it's gone many different directions. And he's just he switched directions, as you said, in the middle from whatever crystallizing event it was that he saw. And boom, he has now given his life over to this global issue of people starving and dying and medical conditions. He talked about the blindness in these villages because they just can't get medical help, and so much of that is then related to the clean water, right?
53% of diseases are directly related.
It's just absolutely fascinating, and it's et cetera. Sephra says, I don't know what she says, but in this particular, she actually just threw me by just staring at me. Interesting, but I mean. Anyway, go ahead.
We know what she says. We don't know what she means.
No, but wait, guys, what was that interview where Joe talked about the pivot, right? Wasn't there one that we talked about where it's what one was that?
Well, he talked about when you're well, but also the
turn.
idea that when you're moving forward, and you sometimes get to a spot that does it make sense to move forward? There's an alternative to moving backward, and that's pivoting and going a different direction. And sometimes you're pivoting to get to the same goal. In this case, here's a guy who pivoted to get to a different goal. But something I thought about when I was listening to this, and I thought about a previous interview with Charlie Engle. And Charlie's a guy who, he talked about how he had addictions, how he'd actually made some shady deals that ended up in
Good
prison.
at quitting, did it
right?
all down.
Yeah. And then he came back and he switched that addiction. And he turned that into a positive addiction, into addiction for running, into addiction for fundraising, into addiction for making
the same with
differences.
Ray.
Channeling that energy.
Exactly. And it's same as Ray, same as a lot of these people. And I always reflect on some of these compulsive driven personalities simply needed an outlet. Yeah. And I look at, even with Spartan Race, for example.
Well, they're prone to extremes, though, right?
Yeah.
These guys are pendulum people.
Exactly.
They're either one end or they're at the other end.
Pendulum people.
And they're just, it's so funny because a lot of our influence in our society try and get us back into the center. And there's some people who don't belong in the center. Right. And if they don't have a good outlet on this end of the spectrum, they're going to go to that end. Just as a personal anecdote, it's funny, when I did my first race down here in Pittsfield, one of Joe's death races, and I remember coming home and my dad said, well, good, you've got that out of your system. I said, no.
I just got in.
I've just found a really good, safe outlet for a lot of my more extreme compulsive tendencies. And so it's really nice, I found, that I can now channel that into more positive things. These guys, more extreme on both ends. I think they were more extreme on the hard side, and they're more extreme on the contributing side. But just really great. So anyone that's watching or listening that, has challenges in your life that you think, how do I stop doing this? Maybe it's a matter of redirecting all that energy that goes into gambling or pornography or drugs or alcohol or whatever else it is. Yeah. It's not that it's bad energy; it's that it's a bad direction for that energy. Mm-hmm. So that's just something that I've thought about before. We have so many people on here who are so driven, and if they didn't have these outlets for it, they'd be doing something else. It just might be on the other end of the ledger.
Yeah, but I think like a tale. You have to believe that things happen for a reason, right? And he was saying,
no, you don't. I don't have to believe anything, but keep going.
No. I was like, huh? But what I'm trying to say is, he did have that decade of vice, right? But what did it get him? It got him a mailing list of, superstars, millionaires, billionaires, all these people that he actually utilized that resource then when he got into philanthropy and we got into this cause, and he was able to already have a base of people. And he said, some people are like, oh, it's not a table at, Pasha or whatever. I'm out of here. I no longer care about what you're into. But some people got really hooked on it. So everything in your life, even, I guess with addiction and things that you have to leave and change who you surround your friends with, but always look at all of your resources and say, even if you change what you're into and what you like, yeah, some friends might go by the wayside, but some friends might also be able to pivot and turn with you.
Thank you for being part of Spartan Up. We love this podcast. We hope you do. You've got to subscribe to iTunes. You've got to get people to listen. The goal is we want to inspire everybody to be carrying a kettlebell up the stairs like I am. 44 floors. Oh my God. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to another epic story of success.
To find more show notes, lessons, audio, video, and everything Spartan, please visit us at spartan.com/podcast.
The Spartan Up Podcast is brought to you by Spartan.
To find a race near you, visit Spartan.com.
If you like our message, please help us get the word out. Tell your friends about Spartan Up. And go ahead and subscribe on iTunes or YouTube, wherever you watch or listen to the show.